Today's session is Inlays with Origin, start to finish. This is really everything you're going to need to know from prepping files all the way to cutting the shapes and fitting the shapes. So we're going to cut over to Sam in Oakland and get started over there.
Cool. Well, apparently Sam's having a little bit of issues, so we're gonna kind of bring it over to my side. So instead of with Sam and Jake, it's gonna be with Jake and Sean, I guess. If Sam gets back in, we'll have him take over a little bit. But let's talk about a couple of things that we want to go over in this. Joe just mentioned a couple of them high level, but we're gonna walk through this little deck and kind of explain a few things. So. One thing to start with, Origin is a really good tool for inlay work. It offers really consistent results and a lot of flexibility while you're working on it. This is one of the things that can be really useful, I think, when you're working on inlays. So let's talk about some of the advantages real quick. For one, scale can be manipulated like at a workbench without a computer, which is quite cool when you're working in the field, especially if you're doing more flooring stuff. And then the really key thing here is the friction fit. So being able to use offsets, positive and negative, is actually a really nice way to get a perfect fitting inlay, even with ability to change it and make it fit the glue or without glue or however you want to do it. Another thing that we should talk about, and then we'll go over, is often one time you can use the one single file to do the pocket in the material and the positive that you're going to put in for the plug. So this is not the case all the time, and we're going to get into this pretty soon, but that's one of the things that we'll talk about that's really cool, where you can use the different cut types to change from inside to outside to pocket, all three from a single file. The next thing is multiple shapes can be cut into one another, providing that you keep the shaper tape there. This is one of the things that's really cool, where you can actually do different types of inlays in one area, and then you'll get that output. So like if you wanted to do one inlay and then another one inside of that inlay, that's something you can do using the same shaper tape. It knows the position, and you'll be able to just keep working. Another thing that's really a big advantage of inlays with Origin is extreme precision. Being able to work on site, doing large projects, stuff that you can't really do out of the field and then bring it, and then you're kind of stuck if it's not correct. You can do a lot of stuff on site, especially when we're talking about flooring inlays, medallions, that kind of thing. And then the last thing that we really were going to go over is how you can use different inlays and various fabrication techniques, water jetting, different metal materials, laser cutting things, and then using the same vector file to pocket and fit with Origin. So these are some of the advantages of using Origin for inlays, and let's cut over here.
Yeah, I'll have a look at your screen and describe what's going on. Yeah, we can that way.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So yeah, here's our inlay. You've got an SVG file. It's the shape of a star. Your intention is to inlay this into another panel, be it in the field, in your shop, small, large, whatever. This file with the sharp edges is what you have in mind to inlay. And then we'll step through to the next frame, and we'll look at just what the assumptions are for how you would expect this to work. So you're going to pocket out the shape. Everything seems reasonable at the moment. All the corners, you'll notice, are very sharp. And then by combining those two shapes, so this will be the next slide, we'll combine both these shapes, and everything should go together super cleanly. That's sort of conceptually what you want to do when you're pocketing. Now we need to talk through some of the things you're going to work on to get it just right with basically any CNC machine. Origin, if it's got a spinning cutter, it's going to actually result like this. So here we see all the inside edges. I don't know if you can point to it, Sean, the little areas that have got the curve in there. So those details, you'll notice, depending on the diameter of the cutter that you have installed, they'll get rounded over. So all the outside corners that are pointed, it can cut perfectly. But because of the diameter of the spinning cutter itself, those inside edges are going to leave material there. So now we need to start adjusting our technique a little bit. So this is true across any milling operation that has a rotating cutter. And we'll show you what the approach is for Origin. So next frame, here we have the exact same thing happening, but with the pocketing operation. So this is where we mill out all the material to place our positive into, and you'll see those sharp corners are no longer sharp. They're rounded based on the cutter. So with that in mind, we'll go to the next slide. And we'll see this is the area where those two shapes are going to interfere. So those two shapes leave material where they'll collide with one another. One will leave material on those inside edges, and the positive will relieve it on the other edges. So all those red areas are going to prevent you from combining those two shapes seamlessly without a post operation. So if we go to the next frame, this is how we, I mean, this is a much more elaborate image. Jake will actually run you through this project in a little bit, but we've got here our options for how we can address these problems, the material left in the corner. So we can either chisel out the corners, we can do and to help with that, we can do it, actually we can step through the next frame to have a look, Sean. So this is just showing if we were to engrave that shape with the hard edges on top of our pocket, we can see there's the details that we need to chisel out are identified there. I've just highlighted the gray cutter diameter to see how that's not able to get all the way into those corners. So then we can come through and use a chisel and follow those engraved lines. Because they're an online cut, so long as you cut very shallow, that's a great reference for where to chisel material out. Now, it does require that you do some post-operation. You know, there's more labor. There's a chance of getting the friction fit, but this is the best approach if you want to keep those sharp corners. So then we'll step through to the next shot. By the way, we're looking at an 1/8 inch cutter, what it would produce, and this star is theoretically about 2 inches across. So for the positive element, we're chiseling out those little details in the inside corners there. That'll get us sharp edges. And then we'll move over to the pocket. And you'll see we can do the same thing here, chiseling out those pointed corners. And then at this point, those two objects can be mounted and will intersect exactly as you wish. Now, there's some other strategies as well, and there's some pros and cons with those. I should just say that this chiseling out means you can still scale this file to any size. You haven't kind of baked in an assumption about what size your cutter is relative to the file at this stage. So if we, one more thing worth mentioning, just a little tip there. There's a to take the top off, midway through your pocketing operation, or once you've completed what you believe to be the completion of this pocket. We always recommend leaving that on. It gives you options, pretty crazy options actually with Origin, because everything remains perfectly registered based on the position of the tape. So long as you don't remove it or sand it off, you could literally come back and decide, oh, the material I've inserted here is the wrong material. And you could mill out the whole shape again and put something else in there. You can also obviously come through and tune up your friction fit, how much of a gap you want, that sort of thing. So one big pointer is, don't remove the tape the moment you're happy with what you've got. You could change your mind later. And one of the beauties of Origin is the ability to come in, change your mind, adapt, add more geometry, do whatever you like. So we'll move to the next frame. So this is just, showing with a little work, those two elements will fit together perfectly. Next frame, actually we'll step through the next two, Sean. And they line up. Now the next approach is to, at the outset of your inlay operation, take into account the cutter you're going to use. So there's pros and cons to each, like either a very small cutter or a large cutter. So here we're seeing, and this is just accepting that this cutter is going to have an 1/8 of an inch diameter, and then baking that 1/8 inch diameter into the file. So now you'll see the inside edges match what we'd get if we cut it with this cutter. Like we get the exact amount of material removed that it can remove, and the same applies to the outside edges. that shows how much material we can remove when we're pocketing. So by baking in the cutter into the file, its diameter, or it'll be the radius you'll enter in any CAD or 2D vector editing app. This is how you guarantee that it will always install perfectly based on baking that in there. Now, keep in mind there's trade-offs. Step through to the next one, Sean. So we could, we want it more pointy, more pronounced points. This means, obviously cutting around those edges. If it gets too narrow and too pointy, it's actually difficult to keep wood holding together. The friction as the cutter passes through can be a little bit violent, and it can takes an effort to keep things in place. But basically, if you're using a smaller cutter, you get more detail, but it takes you a lot longer, and you may have to do more depth passes to get down to that level of detail. So it's a balancing act of, how much detail do you want, and how long are you prepared to spend cutting it. Same applies for any CNC process using a rotating cutter. So yeah, that's one approach. We'll go through to the next slide. And then the opposite is true. You can beef it up and make it this is a 1/4 inch cutter now. It's way more gummy and rounded, obviously, but this will be very fast to clear out. And there's always the option of doing a sort of a hybrid approach, right? You could pocket out the interior with a 1/4 inch and then come through with the 1/16 and just do a finishing pass around the outside edge to get that detail. So we encourage you to, test cut elements, A, using the cutters you intend to use, B, using the materials you intend to use, because the adjustments you'll have to do to offsets to get exactly the friction fit and the glue up you're looking for will vary based on the cutter and based on the material. Like, hickory is a lot harder than bass, and a 1/4 inch cutter is slightly smaller than a 1/4 inch, whereas an 1/8 inch cutter is bang on an 1/8 of an inch, or our stock ones are anyway. Now, keep in mind, you can scale these up. Once you've baked this cutter diameter into your file, you can scale them up, but you can't scale them down. Or if you do scale them down, you have to scale down your cutter with it. So if I designed a file with a 1/4 inch cutter diameter in it and then tried to make it half the size, I'm going to have to use an 1/8 inch cutter to make sure I can clear all that material accurately. So that's that. Next one. Now we're looking here, you can obviously get super elaborate, and there's no real limit to the type of complexity and detail you can add to your files. We're going to flip over to Jake and have him work through some of the actual techniques with Origin. So we just wanted to bake these diagrams out so that it was very clear for you to look at and get a clear understanding without, sawdust and things in the way. So I hope that gives you a primer for the sort of conceptual approach to inlays using Origin. And then we'll roll over to you, Jake, in the shop.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Before I hop into showing you exactly that last slide and taking those 2 different species of wood and creating that half radius on either side, I just want to show you my toolkit, my personal inlay must-haves. And I'm going to start with workstation. Now, before I had the workstation, the shaper workstation, I had to find a material that was the same thickness as my inlay material so that I could use it as tape board. But instead now, I can just mill my material down to whatever thickness, say 1/8 of an inch, put it on my shelf with some good double-sided tape, and I can adjust that shelf to be exactly flat with my tape surface. That just takes so much worry and pain out of the situation, and also gives you a little bit of freedom on the different thicknesses of wood you can use to inlay. Next, a good roll of double-sided tape, something that's not going to gunk your cutter up too much, but it's also going to have a nice strong hold, especially when you're dealing with those tiny little pieces. Always press really firmly before you cut, and take nice gentle passes when you get down to the final details of things. Again, when dealing with fragile little pieces, you want something nice like a flexible putty knife to be able to pry up your material, to get under that double-sided tape and pry it up so you don't break your pieces as you're taking them off. And a nice little sanding stick. do some detail work, get rid of any fuzz, and clean your things up to get them ready to actually be inlaid. So I did a couple of rough pockets first, just to kind of save us some time here. But what we're gonna do is, on this pocket down here, we have our positive pieces already cut. Now these positive pieces are cut to a 0-inch offset. So they're the exact shape that I designed them to be, which means we're gonna do all of our offsets over here on the pocket. Set those to the side, bring my tool over. Okay, so I have an 1/8 inch cutter in at the moment, and you can see I hogged out my material with a 1/4 inch cutter, and it didn't quite allow me to get all the way into that corner. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a 0-inch offset pass to clear that material, and then I'm gonna do one more pass that takes a negative offset away, and that's gonna give me a little room to actually set my pieces in. So I'm gonna jump in and do that.
So I'll take over now. You got my mic? Right, so you give me a heads up when we're good, Noah. Excellent. So Jake's cutting 1/8 of an inch deep, and he's performing an inside cut. You'll notice around this corner, he's auto moding, because when he cleared out a lot of material there, he was effectively doing a full depth cut in that corner. There was a lot of material left. So he's being very cautious in these corners to get exactly the detail he's looking for. He'll have his auto speed set around 8 or maybe 9 to make sure he gets perfect outcomes when he does that auto operation around a sharpish corner. So this is a finishing pass. You can tell he's got his offset set to 0. So he's just going through and being very cautious, moving very smoothly to make sure he gets a perfect outcome, because this is the one that matters when he comes to mount them.
So I just want to show, before I do my negative offset, that these pieces are the exact same shape. So they're actually not going to fit. I need to take that negative offset away so that it gives me a little bit of wiggle room, and I can slip in there.
So a negative offset is removing more material from that, the line he created for his pocket. So his pocket, that pocket is line to line, exactly matching the shapes that he's trying to install into it. And he needs to take off ever so slightly more, so there's a little gap that the positive elements can actually fit in there and nest neatly together. So he's put 0.003 inches more he's removing from that. So that the negative means it's cutting more. If you were to have a positive offset, you would be leaving material. We usually refer to that as like a roughing pass. So that's stepping away from the final dimension versus stepping over it and milling out more material. So once again, same thing. It can be tempting to go really fast because you're not removing much material, but you do have to move cautiously and smoothly.
Knock off some of that fuzz. You'll see.
So Jake's just knocking off the fuzz there. If there's any fuzz, upcutters can produce a little bit of fuzz. Just hit that with sandpaper. That'll reduce your ability to cleanly nest them together. But a light touch with sandpaper, and he should be able to install his positives, perfectly aligning. So he's combining various woods here, and because he's able to set the depth exactly with Origin's depth setting, he knows that I think it's approximately 1/8 of an inch, these elements he's dropping in there. He knows it's going to be flush with the top surface. We've had people even do this on like finished floors and get it exactly the right depth. Usually you would want the opportunity to be able to sand the top back and make sure everything's good. But that's a pretty compelling operation there, Jake. Looking good.
Yeah. So the next one, I'm going to do an inlay within an inlay, kind of an inlay inception. I have my rough oval pocket out already. I'm gonna put a nice piece of ash. My ash is a little bit thicker than my other inlay. I'm gonna set that in, and then using the same file, the same registration, because it's all mapped out on the tape, I don't have to place another file. I can now cut my second inlay into the ash. And I know I want to adjust this just a little bit because I have that, that pocket roughed out. And I believe it is going to be a, say a 4,000, negative 4,000, and we're going a little deeper. We're going 0.23 on this one. So I'm going to do a quick pass with this, and then I'm going to toss this in.
Exactly the same situation here. He's pocketed out all the interior, and now he's doing a slightly larger finishing pass. You can see negative 0.004. So we're talking in the thousandths of an inch here. We can be very, very accurate and return to a cut and adjust it should we need to take more off until we get exactly the fit we're looking for. So this is his oval. He's moving smoothly and getting a great little pocket for that to go into. And then he'll come through and add a bear, which is, sorry, the New Zealand pronunciation of that is a bit off, B-E-A-R, to install into that. So this sort of stuff's really fun. You can actually combine a lot of different elements. We even do things sometimes like we'll leave as a guide inside of an inlay, you can leave optional alternatives that you may or may not install when you get out on site. So you can have a whole bunch of elements all perfectly registered, perfectly aligned. The moment you place that file, you could have 8 stars on this and the bear. And there it goes. So Jake's actually gone through and using those techniques we described earlier, he's rounded all the corners to make sure there's no sharp edges. So based on the cutter he intends to use, he's going to get exactly the material removed that he intends to. So he doesn't have to go through and do any chiseling at the end of this. He'll be able to just combine the two.
And I want to take a quick moment.
Another little note. Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to show my design file here. And I went in and I really spent special attention to make sure that I could get an 1/8 inch cutter into not only these pieces, but also down into these pieces. So just wanted to show that off real quick. Not to mention the direction of my grain right here. So I wanted to make sure my grain's going across. And that is that. Okay.
So when Jake's referring to his grain direction, he just added a little blue line with arrows on the end. That's a guide. So that will never show up as a cuttable line unless you tell it. You can change it to a cuttable line, which was what I was describing previously with alternative shapes. You can change in cut lines on the tool in the field. You don't need to go back to a computer. But in this case, Jake's just using it for notation to make sure he can keep track of what direction his grain needs to be. So that when he's placing that positive shape down onto his wood panel, he can see the grain, and then he can see that little line and orient origin and his file exactly the way he needs. So he keeps it mapped to how he wants it to look in the final product. So all of this stuff we're obviously doing in a workshop, but you could be doing this anywhere. You could go to a client's site. They could say, hey, I need X, Y, or Z. You prepare the file for them, and then you can install that in the same afternoon on site. So if you need to customize a sign, a headboard of a bed, cutting boards, you name it. If there's some kind of ornamentation or customization, you can turn that around pretty quickly. And if you're not confident doing that prep work, we'll show you how to do that as well. But if you're not confident rounding all those corners and preparing the file, you can actually send that over the fence to us at assist.shapertools.com. So Assist is a service that we provide for anyone who has any struggles with the digital file preparation process. If you reach stumbling blocks anywhere along the way, you can just reach out to us, and we'll quote you for what it will cost to prepare those files and send them back to you as a Shaper Hub project that instantly syncs to your tool ready for cutting. So you would just take a photo of or send us a file of what it is you want. there's an excellent little screen that'll ask you all the key questions and give you a rough idea of some examples for what other projects have cost, so that you can get a good idea of what to expect. We'll tell you how long it will take, what it will cost, and prep those files so that you have a good cutting experience. So all the people involved in Assist are very familiar with Origin. They're very familiar with inlaying operations. So they're going to help you navigate some of the pitfalls and things. Back to Jake. It looks like he's had a good outcome there.
Yeah, that was
so
a 1/4" cutter, just to make my life a little easier and faster. I'm going to switch back to my 1/8" cutter so I can get into those details.
So that's what we were describing at the beginning. Like, often, depending on the size or complexity of the object you're cutting, one cutter may not be appropriate for doing the whole thing. Like, Jake would take twice as long or more to clear out that area if he kept that 1/8" cutter throughout. The beauty of Origin is you can change cutters and decide to approach something completely differently mid-project. So he could have done that first pass with a 1/2" cutter if he wanted to. And then he could just do a Z touch, which is that basically when he changes the cutter, that measures the height of Z equals 0. So now he can confidently have both those different cutters the exact same height on the bottom of his pocket there. So now he's going through and doing the details around the edge. This will enable him to install the bear shape. So this one is a roughing pass, 0.02 inches positive offset. So what that's doing is that's leaving material on the side there. So he will then follow up and start inching into negative offsets to get exactly the fit he's looking for. So you can be, the roughing process enables you to be relatively productive, quite quick. So you can get through the operation fast, and then it's up to you to really focus and move smoothly and get the good outcomes. Just focus on the finishing pass. So on the left-hand side, you'll see all the menus. For the top is depth. Then there's the cutter, the cut type. So he's doing an inside cut. Then we get our offset, which is 0.02 positive. So he's leaving material. Then he describes the cutter diameter, and Origin keeps track of all that and shows you and updates the toolpaths as you go.
So I'm actually going to do
So the next step is going to be
I'm going to do a 0 pass, and then I'm going to do my, oops, just give me 0. And then I'll do a negative.
Yeah, so when you're unsure of the fit you're looking for, you've got a new cutter, new materials, it always, the cautious approach is to inch up on that final dimension you're looking for. So in this case, he's doing a 0 offset. So that means his pocket and his positive element are going to kind of collide with one another. It's an interference fit. So potentially he could hammer that in if he was feeling bold, but what we're looking for here is a little more breathing room for the glue to work and just have a nice smooth fit. So he'll do another couple of thousandths of an inch off in the next pass, and that's the cautious way to work your way up to the exact fit you're looking for. What's really cool with this is he could have a whole bunch of other elements in this and inlay this and then sand it back and then inlay another thing, sand that back. So you can start to get quite complicated depending on how you approach it. Keep in mind the tape guarantees that every time you power Origin up and look at the same panel with the tape on it, you're cutting exactly where you left off. Like we keep track of that precision and that consistent cut path. So you can then go in and manipulate, make decisions. It's much more like traditional woodworking. You don't bake out the entire process in advance and then just sit back and watch it. You are intimately involved in making decisions as you go. So yeah, this is another one, 0.004 negative offset. So this is just a very tiny 4/1000th of a sliver off there. And that should give him the breathing room he's looking for to fit the bear shape in there. So we can probably even start talking through some tricks while we look at this. So we've mentioned you can use this for ornamental work, obviously, customization, but you can also get into things like error repair, like a Dutchman. You could take it to a floor, mill out some rotted or damaged area, and cut the positive and the negative all on site and assemble them exactly as intended. So just sanding off the little bits of fuzz to make sure it all goes together. And then we'll see how that all aligns.
I think this is gonna be perfect fit. All right. Bring it over. Bada bing, bada boom. All right, there's our California bear.
Magical.
Inlaid into some locally grown ash.
Looking awesome, Jake.
So
can you just tell us how deep the ash was, how thick the ash was?
the ash is 0.23 inches deep, and the walnut is only about 1/8 of an inch thick. So, and the reason I did that is so that instead of having both of them the same thickness, it actually gave me a little bit more stability in the ash if I just did a shallow pocket into it versus cut all the way through something. Mainly this spindly little part right here between the bear's legs. If you know, I'd risk potentially breaking that off. And again, that has to do a lot with grain direction and what makes wood vulnerable in certain directions. Let's see.
Perfect. Noah, if my video is holding up, I'll do a quick demo of the rounding the corners. Okay. Yeah, maybe I won't. Okay, we'll have to save that for another time then.
I just want to show a couple of these.
So then we will get back to. Oh yeah, yeah, for sure.
Just some of the bigger things that we've done.
Here's some examples of origin.
And also different wood species integrated different. So this is not one solid component. This is 3 separate files that you can arrange on a piece of wood, on a piece of inlay material in any fashion you want. Again, still considering grain direction, but being able to break these different components up and be a little bit more caring about how you're laying out your design, not only saves you on waste, but allows you to kind of skirt around defects in the wood or anything that might slow you down. Back to you, Sam. Do we want to talk a little bit about?
Awesome. So we'll get back into some tips and tricks here.
Yes.
Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind with all this is, yeah, actually, Jake, if you can be showing him some of the projects you've done there, would be great while I talk over them.
Absolutely.
So yeah, if you scale up or down a design, it's always good to have some different sized cutters up your sleeve. So, you know, if you've designed something with a 1/4 inch cutter in mind, and then suddenly you want to do the file, you know, significantly smaller, you may need a 1/16 inch cutter to get into those details. So it's always good to have a few different size cutters on hand ready for that. If you're doing a really large pocket, we've mentioned this as well, don't be thinking about the detail, the finish pass. You've got a separate project ahead of you, which is clearing out the material in the center. And it may even be combining origin either with a larger cutter using origin to clear that out. It's entirely capable of that. Or you can do a hybrid operation where you maybe cut the perimeter with origin and then come through with a traditional hand router and clear out all that center material. You can get a little advantage with the origin depth setting. If you do a helix circle that's the same diameter or a little more than the cutter you're going to use in your hand router, your larger hand router, you can actually use that as a depth stop kind of to set the depth you intend to cut the remainder of it at. So that's a good technique for clearing out a lot of material quickly using a combination of tools. And then if you have a very large inlay, like we've had people do projects that are like 40 feet long, and they've done that by combining segments of elements. And you wouldn't inlay a continuous object that length. You would break it up into smaller pieces, or for this particular project, it was actually a resin pour. So always consider falling back to a different technique so that you get the details where you need them, and don't like just try to do a massive continuous inlay. Often they end up being segmented anyway because of the dimensions of wood that are available. But yeah, keep in mind. And then the same is true if you get smaller. Consider, text and things get very spindly and very difficult to manage. They fall apart as they get very tiny. So you can always roll back to like an engraving operation, and then maybe sprinkle in. There's some comments on the community, the Shaper Tools community, where they describe sprinkling in little bits of carbon or something in shellac to really highlight those paths.
Awesome pro tips and tricks today. That was great. And thank you very much, Jake. I even learned a lot during this session, so I think I'll stick around for them. So remember, everyone, Sam mentioned it, but Shaper Assist is a super easy way for you to get your inlay file origin ready. So if that's a step that you want to kind of bypass in your learning curve, go to assist.shapertools.com, learn more about that, get a file in there, get a project started so you can get your inlays going right away. Also, remember, everybody, remember to like and subscribe to notifications on YouTube to be notified of future sessions.